I was waiting to do my July GPU buying guide until I had the 50/50 in my hand, and I can now confirm, don't buy it. So the good news is, since last month, there was a new GPU launch. The bad news is it's not worth buying. So I'll get into all my recommendations at various price points here, but let's talk about the 50/50 and how it fits into the market, since that's the biggest change. It is available at its MSRP of $250 in the United States, although supply hasn't been great for these. I hope that just means there's not a lot of supply and not that they're like flying off the shelves. We'll have to see, but the 50/50 is an 8GB graphics card with reasonable gaming performance in the sense that you can play all the newest games, but you do have to turn down some graphics settings to hit 60 FPS, and somebody looking for esports will definitely be able to play their games and all of that. But why would I still then not recommend it? Well, let's give you a couple of reasons. One is that, here, I don't have all my side-by-sides done yet. I have completed my 50/50 benchmarking, but I haven't ranked it against the other GPUs yet. If we pop into hardware unbox results, though, because they're one of the other outlets who have bought a 50/50 since NVIDIA didn't send them out for review samples, you can see a couple of issues here. One is if you spend slightly more to get something like a 9060 XT 8GB, or even a 5060, you get an appreciable amount more performance. In fact, more performance per dollar if you spend a little bit more. In this case, the more you spend, the better value you get compared to the 50/50. And it also stacks up terribly compared to previous generation products that you can get at great deals on the used market right now, like the RTX 3060, which at 1440p is actually beating the 50/50 in hardware unbox testing, although it should be noted that at 1080p, it is a little bit ahead by about 10% compared to the 3060. A lot of that's probably due to the VRAM difference, where the 3060 is less likely to run out of VRAM, while the 8GB card can certainly struggle, and that happens more often at 1440p. Check this out. If you go to somewhere like Jawa.gg, you can get an RTX 3060 for $200. Now, it is used, but I did double check that this is indeed the 12GB model. So you are getting more VRAM, similar performance, maybe a little better at 1440p, maybe a little bit worse at 1080p, but for significantly less money than that RTX 5050. So if you're just looking for a budget card, the used market really is the way to go, and I can get you $10 off your first purchase if you use code OWEN10. And a huge thank you to Jawa for sponsoring today's video. Also, if you're trying to upgrade your graphics card, you should sell your old hardware to fund that upgrade, which you can do at Jawa. This is where you buy, sell, and upgrade between gamers, and there's a couple ways you can do it. You can create your own listing and set your own price on their marketplace, but you could also get maximum convenience by clicking the Get an Instant Offer button, where Jawa will give you cash for your GPU or CPU incredibly quick and easy. If you give up on buying the individual components, they also sell pre-built systems, and you can get some really great offers. And you can also shop by theme to fit your environment, or you can shop by the parts inside, CPU, GPU, performance in specific games. There's great reviews. There's a huge Discord community. Highly recommend it. And again, use code OWEN10 for $10 off your first purchase. So in the used market, you can get a better deal than the 50/50 if you just want to spend less and you're just ultra budget conscious. And if you are willing to buy new and spend just a little bit more, you can get a better deal than the 50/50. Let me follow up with that for a second here. So if we looked at NVIDIA's data here, where again, the 9060 XT 8GB is 56% faster than the 50/50. First of all, I want to be clear, I'm not really recommending 8GB cards, but if you were going to buy one, check this out right now. So the 9060 XT, if you're buying the 8GB version, has had some pretty crazy sales. Now, they are available at their MSRP of $300, and this 250 isn't quite as good as it looks, because this is relying on a $50 promotional gift card with the purchase, so it's really $300, but then you get a $50 like Newegg gift card or something like that. But if you were going to spend the extra $50 for something else that they sell, the point is that you're effectively spending the same money as that 50/50. But if you're not going to count that, you could still look at this $280 offer from B&H, and at $280, check this out. So 280 divided by 250 is 12% more money. So if you're willing to spend 12% more money On the on the RX 9060 XT 8 gigabyte, you get like over 50% more performance. So the 5050 really feels like it's in a no man's land. It either needs to cost less, or it just needed to be more powerful. That's really where it's at. It doesn't fit well into the market. So can't really recommend that. So honestly, though, it's hard for me to really recommend the 9060 8 gigabyte, though, 9060 XT 8 gigabyte, just because I really think that 8 gigabyte cards right now are struggling a lot if you play anything other than esports games. If you're playing new AAA games, then the 9060 XT is powerful enough to run them at their maximum settings. But the problem is that without with only 8 gigabytes of VRAM, it really can struggle. I've shown this a lot in my testing, so I'm really having trouble recommending that, which means that if you're looking at the new market, the lowest priced graphics card that I can really actually recommend without any real caveats is the 9060 XT 16 gigabyte. Now, this comes in at about $360 at its lowest price in the United States, which is $10 above its MSRP. But if you're playing at either 1080p or 1440p, I think this card can basically do everything you need it to do. No, it's not going to be the big path tracing workloads or anything like that. But other than that, at max or near maximum graphics settings in the latest games, it does well, and AMD's FSR 4 has done a good job of closing the quality gap with DLSS. Now, DLSS 4 still looks slightly better than FSR 4, but I think the bigger issue for me is that it's available in more games. Now, if you're not playing in games with anti-cheat software, using a mod like Optiscaler is not particularly difficult, and I've shown how to do that to add FSR 4 into unsupported games, but that is definitely more of a hassle. But other than that, the 9060 XT 16 gigabyte is really a great choice here. And if I was looking at the NVIDIA competition, I know some people always get mad at me about this, but its competition is not the 5060 Ti 8 gigabyte. 16 gigabyte, it's the 8 gigabyte. The 8 gigabyte model is the price match for the 9060 XT 16 gigabyte model. They cost the same. $353.48 for the lowest price right now on a 5060 Ti 8 gigabyte, and they go up from there. The 16 gigabyte models don't start until $430. So if you're trying to buy a graphics card for less than $400, the 9060 XT 16 gigabyte is my recommendation. If you do have more than $400, I don't think the 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte is a bad choice. Now, at $430 instead of $360, let's do a little bit of math here. So $430 divided by $360 gives us about 19% price increase. But for that 19% price increase, you actually are on average getting a little bit more performance, although it's not 19% more performance, but a little bit more performance. And like I said, DLSS 4 has wider availability, not having to rely on mods like Optiscaler to get it into some of the latest games. And also, DLSS has a multi-frame generation feature, which AMD is still on single frame gen. And I do think that NVIDIA frame gen can sometimes, in my opinion, look a bit more smooth, frame pacing wise and quality wise on my display. The point is, for that extra 19% money, you are getting some legitimate feature set increases and some actually a little bit additional raw performance. So I don't hate the 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte, and so I'm going to say that if you need a GPU under $400, get yourself the 9060 XT 16 gigabyte. But if you can spend a little more than $400 and you'd prefer to go the NVIDIA route, the 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte is not a bad choice. Both of these make sense. And actually, that's kind of the same sort of situation I'm going to see when we go over $500, because the next step up is the RTX 5070. These are available for $550, and it is noticeably more powerful than a 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte. But it does have the downside of only having 12 gigabytes of VRAM. So while you get more performance, you do get less VRAM. Now, the truth about 12 gigabytes of VRAM is that, yes, there are situations right now where games will go beyond it, but they're still pretty rare. However, this feels a lot like, there's no crystal ball. Anybody who tries to tell you they know exactly what's going to happen with this and when, honestly, they don't know, right? Nobody knows. But 8 gigabytes on the 3070 a couple generations ago when it launched was pretty much fine, and there was only very rare situations where it wasn't. But now, 8 gigabytes is very problematic in a lot of games, even at 1080p resolution. The 5070 12 gigabyte is fine right now in the vast majority of games, with the occasional outlier. However, I think really my prediction, if I try to crystal ball it, is that when we get to the next console generation like the PS6, currently the PS5 has 16 gigabytes of unified memory. A lot of it which can be allocated to VRAM, usually probably about 12 gigabytes worth. And hey, 12 gigabytes is kind of squeaking by. The PS6 generation, which might come as soon as like 2027-ish, is very likely going to have at least 24 gigabytes of unified memory, in which case 12 gigabytes is likely going to start to be problematic at the visual design targets for the current generation games at that time. So 12 gigabytes of VRAM isn't a big deal, but it's likely to start to become a little bit of a hassle, at least in the next few years, especially as we move into a new generation of consoles. However, again, I'm just trying to crystal ball the future. So is there an alternative that isn't just going with a weaker card like the 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte? Yes. The closest priced alternative that isn't weaker is the 9070 from AMD, the non-XT version. These are currently available at $600, which is unfortunately $50 above their MSRP. At MSRP, it's supposed to be a price match for the 5070, and honestly, given that NVIDIA kind of has the market share and mind share advantage and a very real feature set advantage, I would really like to see the 9070 priced a bit under the 5070, despite it actually being a little bit more powerful on average. And it does have 16 gigabytes of VRAM. However, like I've said earlier in the video, there are real advantages to DLSS 4 being more widespread, still having some image quality advantages, and just general software support by having such a large market share. Most productivity software, things like that, and even sometimes game patches and whatnot are targeted, a lot of their efforts on supporting the NVIDIA hardware. There's a real advantage to that. And it's just difficult to factor that into how exactly do you value it in your GPU valuation, right? So the 9070 isn't a bad choice to spend $50 more if you're concerned about the 12 gigabytes of VRAM. You do get a bit more performance on average in pretty much everything except for the heaviest ray tracing workloads, where in heavy ray tracing they're about tied, and in path tracing, NVIDIA is still ahead. The 5070 is kind of borderline on path tracing performance, but at 1440p, using an aggressive enough upscaling, which with DLSS 4 does still look pretty great now, can be usable in path tracing workloads. So there's some valuation to that as well. So really, this is another one where I'd give a bit of a split recommendation. I think if the 9070 could just undercut the 5070 pricing at like $499 or something like that, I'd have an easy recommendation, buy a 9070. But at $50 more rather than $50 less, it's like, it's not that much more powerful. It is nice to have the 16 gigabytes of VRAM, but I think it's less of just an easy recommended over the NVIDIA option. So I'm going to once again give a bit of a split recommendation here in this kind of $550 to $600 price point. Now, interestingly, compared to previous GPU recommendation videos, and even different than most reviews of the 9070 and 9070 XT, I don't currently recommend the XT version. Why is that? Well, it's really just the current pricing. The 9670 XT at current pricing in the United States, I realize other regions may be different, is $720. Whereas the non-XT version is $600. So if I do some simple math here, 720 divided by 600 is 20% more money. You're spending 20% more money, but it's rarely, if ever, 20% faster with the XT version. They both have 16 gigabytes of VRAM and the exact same feature set. So the 9070 non-XT is currently in the United States pricing better value than the XT version. And so it would get my recommendation if you're thinking about buying one of these AMD 9070 class cards. Now, this is different than the reviews said because MSRPs, which most reviews were based on initially, were $550 and $600. So at only a $50 more, yeah, I would absolutely recommend the XT version. And also, if it was the XT version coming in at $600 versus the 5070 the 5070 at $550, then the XT version crushes it in value, and I would easily recommend it. But at current pricing, I don't recommend getting the XT version over the non-XT version from a value perspective. Also, because if you're going up to $720, you're now getting dangerously close to the current pricing of the 5070 Ti. The 5070 Ti is sometimes available at its MSRP, but it's still pretty difficult to get. If I was trying to buy it today online, the lowest price I can find is $790. However, if you look at it this way, okay, $790 divided by $720, it's slightly less than 10%. So you're basically spending 10% more money to get the NVIDIA version of the 9070 XT. Now, depending on which benchmarks you look at, sometimes one of these cards is a few percent faster than the other. In my latest testing, they're fairly close, other than in ray tracing, where the 5070 Ti does pull ahead. And in path tracing workloads like Cyberpunk, especially if you're going 1440p, DLSS balanced, but in the RT overdrive mode, the 5070 Ti is completely usable. And in this case, we now have 16 gigabytes of VRAM on both cards from NVIDIA and against the AMD option. So when we're looking at this, you're spending a little less than 10% more money to get what's effectively similar rasterized performance, but better path tracing performance, a slightly better upscaler that is much more widely available. You get the multi-frame gen. They have the same VRAM capacity, so you can't argue anything on that. You get the additional productivity software support, CUDA, etc. I really think that for a $70 price difference, less than 10%, I would buy the 5070 Ti over the 9070 XT. So overall, that's basically my conclusion on why I don't, at least at current pricing in the United States, recommend the 9070 XT. Whereas the 9070 non-XT is the more interesting option currently. Okay, now I realize that other regions could have different pricing, so make sure you're factoring this into your region's pricing. Past this point though, I just don't recommend anything, except for maybe the 5090, but hear me out on that, that's a heavy caveat. Let's talk about why the 5080 is absolutely horrible to even consider purchasing in the United States right now. Maybe your region has better pricing, but the 5070 Ti right now is $790. Keep that in mind when we search for the 5080, where the lowest priced option is $1,265. $1,265 divided by $790 gives me a 60% price increase. If you choose to buy a 5080 instead of a 5070 Ti in the United States right now, you are choosing to spend 60% more money, and what do you get for it? Any more VRAM? No. Any more features? No. Any more performance? Yes, but only about 15%. So if you're spending 60% more money to get 15% more performance, I just cannot recommend doing that. Now, I just want to make sure we understand how little 15% is. If I was at 50 FPS and I increased my frame rate by 15%, I'm still short of 60 FPS. It's only 57.5, okay? A 15% performance increase is effectively hard to notice without a frame rate counter. It's like if you're really trying to notice the difference, you can probably notice it, but it's not mind-blowing, and you can easily adjust one tiny graphics settings tweak and gain that 15%, okay? And you're gonna save yourself 60% of the price, hundreds and hundreds of dollars. Now, why do I say that the 5090 can get sort of a recommendation? Well, the 5090 costs, looks like the lowest cost model currently available in stock online is $2,600. Okay, I don't recommend most people buy a 5090 because for most people, spending nearly $3,000 on their hobby is a lot. You might be going into debt. You might be, don't miss your rent payment, etc. if you're going to do this. I don't think that that's a good thing to do. However, different people are in different financial situations, and if you're just in a place where, gaming is your main hobby and you are in a financial position where spending $3,000 on your hobby isn't really like that big of a deal for your overall financial well-being. You just want to know, is it worth it? Are you getting anything for it? Or is it just completely stupid and pointless? Buying the 5090 from a performance perspective is not completely stupid. The reason is think about other generations where it was. The 3090 compared to the 3080 was only slightly more performance for like double the MSRP. That was completely stupid. If the 5090 was only like 15% faster or something like that compared to a 5080, I think it would be pretty stupid, but it's not. It's noticeably more powerful than a 5080, and the 5080 is stupidly priced anyway. So if you compare it to the last one I recommended, which is the 5070 Ti, there's actually a pretty wide performance gap here. The 5070 Ti can still struggle to make the heaviest situations at 4K, a high performance experience. Whereas the 5090 can basically do whatever you want it to do. Also, unlike the 5080, stepping up from the 5070 Ti, you're actually getting a VRAM capacity increase here as well at 32 gigabytes. And again, 16 gigabytes is completely fine right now. How about with the next console generation? Well, that's less obvious. If those consoles do have 24 gigabytes or even 32 gigabytes of unified memory, it's possible that design targets for games at their maximum settings or even just console level settings, which are often not maximum settings, could be targeting above 16 gigabytes of VRAM. That is certainly possible. With that being the case, the 5090 does justify itself from it's an absolute Halo tier product. It's not good value. But if you're somebody who can afford it pretty easily, but just wants to know, are you completely wasting your money to just throw money at a problem that doesn't exist and you're getting nothing for it? It's not that case. You are definitely getting something for the money. It is just ridiculously expensive, and most people, I think financially, it's probably better to go with something like the 5070 Ti as your high-end GPU because, first of all, it's still a very high-end GPU, and I think if you buy a 5070 Ti, I don't think you're going to be disappointed by that. Honestly, most people are going to be perfectly happy with any of those recommendations I made earlier down the product stack. Most people are going to be completely fine with a 9060 XT 16 gigabyte or a 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte. And heck, even a $200 used 3060. I think a lot of people are going to be happy with that too. But a 5090 does do some stuff that lets you just set it and forget it at maximum settings in games, maybe kick on DLSS quality or something like that, and away you go, okay? So you do get something for it, but not a great value. All right, that was the overall recommendations today. To summarize, if you have tons of money to throw at your hobby and it's no big deal, sure, 5090 is better than everything else out there. But for the rest of us, 5070 Ti is probably the highest you should go, and I do recommend it if it's, let's say the price difference between the 9070 XT doesn't even save you $100. I'd say the 5070 Ti is the way to go there on that option. Stepping down from there, the 9070 non-XT makes sense at $600, but so does the 5070 if you're not too concerned about the 12 gigabyte situation. That's a bit of a split recommendation. Down from there, I don't think the 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte is a bad option at $430, but I think any of the models listed above that are starting to be pretty questionable. And the 9060 XT 16 gigabyte, I think it makes a lot of sense for people wanting to stay under $400 and is a little bit better just raw value than the 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte, although is a little bit slower and you are losing out on some of the NVIDIA DLSS advantages and things like that. Below this point, I can't really recommend anything in the new market. However, if you're gonna buy a new 8GB card, don't make it the 5050. Either get the 5060 or the 9060 XT 8GB version if you're going either the NVIDIA or the AMD route, and just be very confident you are okay with 8GB and what that means. Because yes, the latest games, even at 1080p, are not good to go on 8GB if you're trying to do max settings, and that's right now. You're gonna hold on to this card for a while. If you want the best true budget option, you should probably be looking at the used market, and I would suggest cards like an RTX 3060. Just double check it's the 12GB version like this one at jawa.gg, where you can get it for, heck, actually $10 off your first purchase using code OWEN10, brings it in at $190. And again, that's going to be offering similar performance to the 5050 with more VRAM and a much lower price tag if you're going for that kind of budget option. Once again, thanks to Java for sponsoring today's video. Hopefully you guys found today's video useful and or interesting, and I'll do one of these every month as monitors, pricing, and value options change and any new GPUs come out or whatnot and all that. So stay tuned to the channel. I hope all of you have an excellent day.